I'm Alison Eyring, organization psychologist, CEO, and endurance athlete. I've spent the last 25 years helping companies solve the people and organizational challenges of growth. I've worked with all types of CEOs and business leaders across the world, but it takes a special kind of leader to successfully grow a business. I call them growth leaders. These leaders have an edge for growth. This allows them to drive performance today while transforming their business for tomorrow while keeping their people energized. So whether you're starting a company or reigniting a team within a large, mature company, I'll show you what it takes to successfully drive business growth through conversations with some of the best growth leaders I know. In this episode, we'll dive into the topic of inclusive growth, which is a core element of my own company's Ikigai, which means our purpose and reason for being. It's about creating equal opportunities for economic growth. I'm going to speak with Ling Hai, co-president of Asia Pacific at Mastercard. We're going to talk about this topic of inclusive growth and get to know a little bit more about Mastercard and his role as a growth leader. Ling Hai, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Alison.
Clearly, Mastercard is a household name, and most of our listeners will open up a wallet and find one of your credit cards there. But we don't know as much about the company. Tell me a little bit about Mastercard, the company, that we don't know.
Yes, absolutely. I think the first thing I would say is Mastercard is not a credit card company. We are actually a global payment network. We are a technology company in the payment space. We have a global presence. In Asia, we operate in over 18 countries. We have more than 5,000 employees based here in the region, so we have a very significant presence. But over the years, Mastercard has really also transformed itself. Traditionally, yes, we are a global network that processes mostly payment transactions like debit cards, credit cards, prepaid cards. But increasingly, we're also transforming into a multi-rail network. By that, what I mean is it's not only the cards payment, but also real-time payment, account to account, P2P. We're also embracing technology such as blockchain. So this is what I mean by multi-rail.
And so you use the word rail to mean sort of a way of making payments.
Yes, like we're the railway for payment transactions.
So that's a really interesting space because the way that we buy and purchase items or services has changed so much over the last few years. How has Mastercard changed as payments have changed?
Well, first of all, I think the migration towards digital payments and online e-commerce is actually really good for us, right? You can stick cash into a computer or into your phone. So as people go more online, e-commerce becomes more prevalent. Digital payments become even more important. Our biggest enemy really is cash, right? If you think about the world, 80% of retail transactions are still done through cash. A developed market in China, Japan, it's still 50% cash. So there's a lot of room just to convert cash into electronic payments. But of course, if you look at countries like China, India, the whole thing around real-time payment, P2P, right? The emergence of the digital wallets like Alipay, WeChat Pay, that is a major trend. Blockchain is another one. It's a technology disruption. So those are the things we must keep up with, and these are the things we must invest in.
So it's a little bit of an alphabet soup. You just said P2P. What does that mean?
Oh, person to person. I am so sorry. We're so used to this acronym world. Yes. So person to person payment, person to merchant payment, business to business payment, B2B.
Right.
I have lots of these acronyms for you.
So it's way more complex than it was 10 years ago. So you've been at Mastercard for the past 10 years, clearly a period of transformation in the payment space. Tell me a little bit about what you've learned about managing that type of change at the pace that you've had.
Yeah, well, first of all, I feel very lucky to be part of this growth company on this growth journey for the last decade. So to answer your question, I would actually like to start with my own background a little bit. I grew up in China, and then when I was 20 years ago, I moved to the US. So professionally, I grew up in the States. I really benefited from a country which valued diversity. At least back then, that is the case. But the US is a country that embraced immigration and people from outside the United States, right? Difference is viewed as good. So I think as a leader in any company, that's probably the most important thing, to really understand that diversity matters, differences is what makes us better and stronger. In terms of research, right, people have found out that it's done through research, proven through research, diversity actually drives more productivity and higher performance. But the problem, though, is it's not a natural instinct for people. We like people that are like us, right? We tend to identify more with things that are similar and familiar to us. So the natural instinct is not to embrace differences, but rather to look for similarities. So as a leader, that is the challenge. You need to understand this unconscious bias, right? And really steer people and steer yourself, first of all, but then steer the team in that direction to really allow more inclusion, allow more diversity, because the differences really make us a better company.
Well, and it seems like your own background has helped you in that you were born in Shanghai, you lived in the United States. You actually, when you came back into the region, you worked at HSBC, and you worked in a joint venture with China's biggest bank.
That's right. And even with MasterCard, I was based in Beijing and I ran Greater China. Then I moved to London at a global job. Now I'm here in Asia, co-heading Asia Pacific. So for me, it's been very gratifying, but also I understand the importance of diversity, embracing differences.
Having different thinking and operating in multiple languages.
And that's really a great point, by the way. When I say diversity, it's not just the sort of the different demographic attributes. Yes, it is gender, but it's not just gender. Yes, it is race, but it's not just race. In MasterCard, what we strive for is the diversity in thinking. Your perspectives need to be different. That's why we hire people from different backgrounds, right? We're a payments company. So the historical perspective was you try to bring more people from banks into our company. You hire from financial services. That is a complete different mindset now. We actually like to hire people from technology background, from retail background, from government background, because we operate in an ecosystem in which all these stakeholders really matter to us.
Well, and I think that's interesting because when you described yourself at the beginning, you said, well, we're actually a technology company in the payment space.
Yes.
And so that makes sense that you'll be hiring people from this whole complex world of payments that you were just describing to me.
Yes.
I want to ask you a little bit more about, because you used the word ecosystem. Describe your business ecosystem. Who are some of the key institutions or organizations or people who exist within the MasterCard business ecosystem?
Yes, it's a great question. So there are many of them. Obviously, banks, financial institutions, they are our customers. But merchants are also our customers, right?
And what are some of the examples of what's a typical merchant for you?
For example, Fair Pricing Singapore. It can also be Grab. So it's a digital merchant, right? So merchants cut across all categories. In fact, healthcare is very important to us, right? Hospitals, healthcare providers want to make sure they take electronic payments. So
a merchant is any individual or institution that's allowing payments made through the different rails, as you will, that you offer.
That's right. It could be a school. It's really any business entity that provides a service or a good to consumers. So there's value exchange, and you need to pay for it. So those are the companies and players that we serve. It's huge.
So you've got your merchants, you've got the banks and financial systems. Who else is in your ecosystem?
So I talked about Grab, but these days increasingly the digital players. Whether you are an Alipay in China, whether you're Grab here in Singapore, or it's an Amazon, which is basically both a digital player but also a merchant, right? A retail merchant. So Google is another great example. Facebook is our customer. So the digital space is increasingly very important, and the players emerging from the digital space are increasingly our partners. Another stakeholder group I would talk about is really the government. Well, first of all, think about government as our customer, right? Government have procurement. Government has business travels. So clearly they need payment solutions as our customers. But the other reason we think government is such an important stakeholder is because they're the policymakers. Right? We serve at the pleasure of every government in every country that we enter. So we must work with governments, engage with them to understand their policy mandates and see how MasterCard can really help and add value.
Then I guess people like me I'm in your ecosystem, right? Where I use one of your cards, for instance, to make payments to merchants.
Yes, please make sure it's a MasterCard.
So I'm a valued member of your ecosystem.
Yes,
I really
are.
appreciate that. Not the magnitude of a government, but I see that I'm there.
Yes.
So you were mentioning earlier Alibaba,
Yes.
and I think that payments in China are really amazing. If you go to China, if you've got cash, you're out of luck. And so tell me how that's impacting the rate of change in the world of payments.
Oh, in a very significant way. By the way, we've been in China for more than 30 years now, and we are still very committed to the market. And the good news is, on February the 11th, we got our in-principle approval for our domestic license.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We worked on this for a long time, and now I think we're just at the cusp of having access to the domestic market. This is such exciting news for us. But throughout the journey in China, we are already working with Alibaba and also Tencent as well, various cross-border initiatives, right? Alibaba not only has the China piece, they also invest in companies like Lazada, like Paytm in India. So lots of room to work together today. But once we enter China, I think there will be even more opportunities.
Well, and also as you grow in China, you'll have opportunities to learn as they're really on the leading edge globally in terms of electronic payments and integration of like the buying commercial world with payments.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But because if you think about it, the biggest customer base that Alibaba serves is the small businesses. And I think, this is very important for us. When we talk about financial inclusion or inclusive growth, that is the segment you really need to look at, which is small business. So I'm really looking forward to the broader stage now we have in China and the ability to work with the various people, the various partners in China.
That's super exciting. I'm overwhelmed at the complexity of your role. And I'm sure people listening to this are thinking, oh my gosh, what happens when you're the person that's in charge of a business like that? You have so many people or organizations with a vested interest that are part of your ecosystem. How do you as a leader think about the kind of the competing demands and the different groups have of MasterCard?
Well, first of all, I have good people. I have very good teams. Look, we can't do it on our own or by ourselves as leaders. We must have people. So you need to inspire. You need to lead these people. You need to inspire them. So I think the idea of really understanding what is the right direction, what's the strategy, making sure you communicate that very properly and people actually follow you, right? You're not just a leader and nobody's following you. That's very critical. And I think the communication bit is a major component of that. In terms of understanding the strategic priorities and keep my finger on the pulse of the markets, there's no magic. The real thing you need to do is to be out there. That's why I go out to the markets, talk to customers, talk to regulators, right? Look at consumer research to really understand what the markets are looking for, what is the potential demand that we have not fulfilled. And that's how we do product innovation, by the way, as well. So getting closer to the markets is very critical. In that respect, I'm also very grateful that I have a co-president in the region because Asia is huge, right? From New Zealand all the way to India. It's a big region. Most people don't realize that. So Ari and I divide and conquer, and I think we're just doing more justice to our customers and to our markets.
Coming up in the next segment.
How do you really innovate? What does innovation mean, right? I don't think a company like MasterCard can really innovate without collaborating.
You're listening to Growth Leaders, a podcast with Alison Eyring.
So you said two things that I think are really worth kind of revisiting because if you look at the research on what drives business growth, you just talked about two of them. One is outside-in thinking, and the other is of customer-aligned innovation. And so you said, well, in this world of a lot of complexity, I need to make sure I have clarity and strategic priorities. I can't do it alone, and I spend a lot of time outside. When you spend time with a stakeholder, how do you structure your time with them? What do you think about?
Well, I think about what's their pain point. Right? Because I think to strike the right partnership, by the way, in MasterCard, I think the two key success factors are one, partnership, right? We don't do things on our own. We don't serve consumers directly. We do that through our business clients. And the second one is innovation, which sounds like a buzzword, but it's not. And let me break it down for you. This is the point I want to make. How do you really innovate? What does innovation mean, right? I don't think a company like MasterCard can really innovate without collaborating or partnering with our business clients. So to understand what's their pain point, what are they trying to solve, is always the first priority for me. Right? It's not about what's good for MasterCard. It's what's good for our customers.
Well, and the way you're describing it's very interesting, because I just interviewed someone for another podcast in the series who is an entrepreneur, and this is exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And so the way you're talking about innovating is in fact quite entrepreneurial, which is starting by thinking about the other's pain points and then how do you help solve those.
Correct.
So I really love that.
Correct. And even when we talk to governments, another major stakeholder group, the way we talk about it is not, like when we engage the Chinese government, it's not about what's good for MasterCard. It's about why our participation is good for China, right? Because we invest, because we innovate, because competition brings more benefits to the consumers. Those are the things we talk about. Another thing I want to also point out is in terms of innovation, we also do have a mechanism. We have this platform called the Innovation Labs within MasterCard. We have innovation labs in Sydney, in Singapore, in India, in Dublin, in New York. So we also allow customers to come to us where we can actually look at a real problem, right? We have a process called Star Path where we just put a problem to a 2-3 week program, very intensive. But at the end of the project, we actually have a prototype. We actually have some pilot that we can launch to test and learn. So that's another mechanism we have available for our customers.
I want to ask you a question about the Innovation Lab. My organization sees many companies now implementing Innovation Labs, and I see some being very successful and I see others not. In your mind, what is the number one success factor for making that create real value?
Well, so I think it's the ability to put our money where our mouth is, right? So to tell a customer this is a good thing to do and you do it on your own, that is not as powerful as we both invest, both in terms of money, time, people. So that's, I think, very powerful. The other thing, I think we all have to be realistic about innovation. You think about 100 things, you actually try 10, only one may succeed. So MasterCard has that risk tolerance, and we do this with our customers together with the understanding things may fail, right? We don't set unrealistic expectations like we go through this and some silver bullet will be found. So it's about test and learn. It's about try fast and fail fast, but also learn from the failures. I think that's very important.
I think those are great learnings for leaders everywhere, even if they're in a small company, which is just about co-creation.
Yeah.
And also you really have an abundance mindset when it comes to ideas, but then you really prioritize and are realistic about that. You're only going to have a few things that are going to actually work.
Correct.
So I think that's really
It's like
helpful.
a funnel. It's like a funnel process.
Yeah, exactly. As a leader, you're leading an organization that it's not only large, but it's also growing fast. What's your greatest challenge as a growth leader?
I think the first one I actually mentioned, to help people understand the importance of diversity, right? And I think leaders must take a stand on this and must also lead by example. Let me give you a simple example. Every time we have an open position, I always ask the question on the slate of candidates, why don't we have a woman? Why don't we have somebody that's a Singaporean? Or why don't we have somebody who's from outside Singapore? You got to ask these questions, right? You got to set some metrics as well, because what gets measured gets done. So that's very important. So I think that is the number one challenge, to make sure you nudge people towards embracing differences and diversity. Because again, that makes the team stronger, that makes the organization better, makes the productivity higher. But the second challenge, I think I would say, is it is maybe unique to MasterCard, but not to, it is unique to multinational companies that operate in multiple markets. That is, we're global, but at the same time, as we operate in every market, you need to be local, right? When we're in Korea, you need people who are able to talk to the Korean credit card issuers in their language with the right cultural nuances.
Right.
So how do you find talent that can cross both bridges is always a challenge, right? I need somebody for China, for Korea, for Japan. I need somebody who are local enough to be able to be effective in these local markets. But at the same time, they need to be international and global enough within MasterCard to navigate the company and to bridge the gaps between the region and the market, or the head office and the market. That's very important.
That's such a common challenge, I think, across Asia. It's just that each market is so different. So being a global company, and even the world of payments tends to be fairly centralized.
Yeah.
So to be able to find that balance between the local needs and the global, it must be very challenging in your industry.
Very, very much so. But this is also the beauty of MasterCard as a platform. Look at what I have done, right? Beijing, London, Singapore, we have that platform and we have these opportunities for people if they do want to step up and embrace them. Again, stepping outside your comfort zone. And it was not comfortable for me to move to London, to be honest with you, but I did it because I wanted to do something that challenges myself. So I think that's available for us as a company. But yes, everybody's circumstances are different.
Coming up in the next segment.
We want to bring another 500 million consumers into the formal financial system by 2020.
You're listening to Growth Leaders, a podcast with Alison Eyring.
You know, I wanted to ask you a little bit about inclusive growth. It's a topic for me personally. It's near to my heart.
Yeah.
For my own company, we've identified inclusive growth is a core part of sort of why we exist. And I want to talk with you because MasterCard, I believe, is really a role model to other multinationals in terms of not only your views about inclusive growth, but what you're doing in this space. I think I want to ask you to tell me a little bit about, first, what does inclusive growth mean to MasterCard?
Well, first of all, maybe definition on inclusive growth. In my mind, it's simple. It means everybody ought to have the same access to financial services, to digital services, because equal access brings people equal opportunities. So if you have a bank account in Singapore these days, you want to transfer money to somebody, you can use the real-time payment network in Singapore. You can use PayNow. It's instantaneous. It costs you nothing. Or if you want to send money overseas and I have HSBC, yes, it may cost me $30 to send $10,000 or $20,000, but that's not a big deal in terms of percentage of the total amount. But if you are a domestic helper and you have no bank accounts and you work in Singapore, you want to send $100 back to the Philippines or to Indonesia, it costs you $10. To me, that's criminal. Right? That's not right. So a financially excluded society where there's a segment who's just not benefiting, they're not going to benefit from the rising tide of economic growth because they're left out. And plus, they get hit with the huge cost. So that's not a good country. That's not a good society. Also, another thing you think about is, think about China. The economic growth in the last 30 years, it's not about rich people being able to get even richer and spend more, right? It's about China lifting people out of poverty. So more participation in this wealth, in the formal system. It's also about China creating a 300 million middle class. And those are the people who will bring you the spending power, will ultimately leverage their spending power to drive GDP growth. So I think we all have to think about this way.
Now, you're applying the concept of inclusive growth to your industry, which is around access to capital, which I really love that because I think about micro enterprises are a great example. They're in the same situation where they typically 95% will repay a loan, and yet they pay much more for the loan.
Absolutely.
Right? Whereas the really big companies that can most afford it, they actually pay the lowest interest rates. Talk to me a little bit about your Center for Inclusive Growth, because I am very excited about that. And tell us what it is and what is it that it's doing in the world.
So first of all, I just want to acknowledge the great point you made. When we talk about financial inclusion, it is not just about access to a bank account. It's also the usage of the services, right? So again, let me make it real for you. If I open a bank account, I have $2 in my checking account, but as a small business, I still have no access to working capital financing. That's not going to help me. So that ability to access capital, to use the financial services is very critical. And that's what we strive to do with the Center for Inclusive Growth. There's one thing we are already doing. On a commercial level, we already develop solutions and products that provide different cost alternatives. So what I call solutions or products for all, right? So yes, there is the more premium products if you choose that. But if let's say you're a segment where you're looking for a lower cost alternative, we want to make sure our business partners will be able to provide all these different alternatives, different cost ranges.
And how do you do that?
So let me give you an example. You can make payments with credit card, and sometimes that may be slightly higher cost, right? But if we solve the real-time payment rail, then payments may be free or much cheaper. So there is a lower cost way that we are investing in through the real-time payment, right? We bought companies in cross-border remittances for the same reason. So this is in line with the multi-rail strategy that I just described. And the idea is it's a suite of products, it's a suite of solutions, so we can offer financial services to all at different cost points.
It's really about expanding your idea of product market fit, right?
Yes,
so you have different segments, and you're trying to include a segment that normally would not have been included.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not as profitable, it's harder to reach. And I love that you're explicitly building partnerships and ensuring that that segment is served in an affordable way.
Yeah. So that's the commercial side. And that's sort of, in my mind, it's BAU. This is what we do. We have gone above and beyond. So we actually put aside some money, and it's a significant amount of money to endow this Center for Inclusive Growth. So an idea is we want to leverage the center to really drive financial growth, inclusive growth, especially in the micro small business segment. So let me give you some examples. I think the first thing we have done already is to set real metrics, right? So back even in 2015, we actually said we want to bring another 500 million consumers into the formal financial system by 2020. We have hit that number. So this is my point about what gets measured gets done. So we actually set those targets. Now we have put our money in the Center for Inclusive Growth to drive initiatives such as financial literacy for women. Guess what? Women are usually the financial decision makers in the household. And women are usually the more successful entrepreneurs because they're smarter and they're more responsible than men. So, but oftentimes if you look at some of the Southeast Asian countries or even in China, right, the culture is such, if I had to make a trade-off between sending my son to school or my daughter, who gets the priority? So we want to make sure we actually provide for this bias, correct this bias, and we want to invest in women's financial literacy. That's one example, right?
And do you do that around the world, or are there specific locations where you
No,
do
it's
that?
around the world. But in Asia, even in Asia, we do it in China, in India, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, everywhere. So, but we also do another thing. We actually have this platform called KioNet. It started in Kenya. Now it's actually in the region. We're going to do this first we're already doing this first in India. And the idea is KioNet is a platform for SME to enable them to get more working capital or get more financing, right? The traditional problem with small businesses, they don't have a lot of data. The file is we call thin file, right? For a bank to make a lending decision, if they don't understand who you are, your risk profile, they oftentimes then just shy away from making the loans. So for us to provide this platform, because small businesses make a lot of purchases, right? Inventory, they need supplies. By virtue of doing what they do every day, they actually do have data. So this platform helps capture the data, and the data can then be used for the lenders to make credit decisions, right?
So that they feel that there's less risk.
That's right. If you're a small mom and shop store, but every week it's very clear you stock up with these inventories and you do this on a weekly basis, then it's a pretty good indication your business is going well, right? You're continuously, uninterruptedly restocking the store is a good indication. I'm not saying that's the whole picture,
right,
but those are the things we're trying to help small businesses do.
It's very exciting. What can other leaders do to promote the idea of inclusive growth? How do we let growth include everyone?
I would say start with you. I mean, if I think about me, even before we had this big center of inclusive growth, I myself was already volunteering time to work with NGOs in China, for example, to help small businesses. And what's really interesting is I started with this nonprofit organization delivering basically education to small businesses and entrepreneurs, and also young people fresh out of school. They're trying to start their own businesses. But what we found is the actual rate of people starting business after the training program completed was quite low. And so we went back to the drawing board and did some thinking. Well, what's the problem? The problem is financing, capital, right? So to really start any business, skills, knowledge itself is not enough. You also need capital. So then I started to work with another company to say, how do we actually do skill training plus capital, right? It's almost like venture capital for small businesses. And it's not easy. This is by no means easy, but we started the journey. But by doing so, I also sent a signal to my organization to say, this is something good to do. So more people volunteer their time. So I think a leader can lead by example, by showing to his or her people what's the right thing to do? So start from yourself.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a really great example. And I think it also says that there's ways that we can use our time and our expertise to have an impact in the lives of others, which I think is such an important message.
Yeah. You don't want to underestimate the importance of being a role model. And I'm starting to realize a lot of people really look up to their leaders and they take cues and hints from the leaders. The second thing I would also say is it's really important for a leader to create this safe environment for people to embrace differences. Because again, you see, this is where the dichotomy comes, right? You want people to embrace differences and diversity, but differences are uncomfortable, right? So how do you make sure, and this is, I think, where the MasterCard view on decency, I don't know if you heard this, we talk about IQ, which is intelligence quotient, right? We also talked about EQ, right? And now
emotional quotient.
Yes, now we talk about DQ, which is decency quotient. And what that means is, as a leader, we're asked to have our hand on people's back, not in their face, right?
To support them.
That's right. So creating a safe environment for people to embrace differences, debate different ideas, so that we can come up with better solutions is very important. And I think Google has done this study or research where they actually demonstrated through their data that same kind of people put in a group, whether they feel it's safe, are they feeling they can actually express their views, they can debate among themselves, do they feel safe with each other versus not, creates a huge difference in the productivity and the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, and you're talking about the importance of psychological safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to be able to voice disagreement or to contribute to a conversation.
So then the question is, how do you, as a leader, how do you create that kind of environment, right? My own takeaway is you have to show your own vulnerability first. You have to show you are a human being. And that's how this whole thing started. Because I think the Google study quoted this team leader where the dynamics just wasn't right? And he set people down. And how did he start the conversation? He talked about how he's struggling with cancer, right? And that just really made people stop and think, what are they doing? What's important? Why are we doing this, right? So I think that's
a great example. Also, showing vulnerability says, I trust you. I trust you to not use this information against me.
That's right.
But it can't be done in a fake way.
Yes.
And I think that's really the challenge for leaders is you want to be vulnerable or you want to show it.
You want to be authentic as well.
But you also have to lead. Sometimes there's things that in our personalities that might be better to be not displayed. So I think that's a very challenging balance for leaders.
Yes.
Ling Hai, you've shared so many things today about your journey as a leader and about MasterCard. What advice would you give to leaders about how they can grow as a growth leader?
I think several things. I mean, one thing I keep talking about, I think embrace diversity. And again, don't do the superficial thing. It's not just about, is my mix of gender balance right or not? It's about the diversity in thinking, right? The ability to hire people that are different from you is courage. I mean, it's not easy. It's counterintuitive oftentimes. And there's this, again, unconscious bias. We like to hire people that are just like us. So I think that's the most important thing. I think that the other thing is our secret sauce is partnership, right? MasterCard can do everything on its own. We partner with banks, we partner with merchants, we partner with fintech companies, digital players, governments, telcos, and I think so that's another thing I would offer to leader. And I think the notion extends beyond just business partnership, but within the company you need to think about partnership. Outside the company you need to think about who you work with. I think it is that co-innovation, co-creation that can make business much stronger.
Very nice. And I loved what you said about inclusive growth. You just said start with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Ling Hai, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Growth Leaders wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment and a rating. We'd love to hear what you think. If you have questions about growth or growth leadership, please email us at growthleaders@organizationsolutions.com. Growth Leaders is produced by Organization Solutions in partnership with MediaCorp. Many thanks to Dee Kirk, Sean Young, Barry Toe, Keith Tan, Zach Rassley, and Susan Eyring.